Hello and welcome to Destination 101, the podcast where we bring you inspiring stories and expert insights to help you level up your communication and leadership skills. Today we have with us Declan Shalvey, who is a two-time Distinguished Toastmaster, a Fall Fusion Humorous Speech Contest winner, a district finalist in multiple speech categories. With over 120 workshops delivered to 3,000 people, Declan is a powerhouse of knowledge when it comes to public speaking, leadership, and coaching. From serving in multiple officer roles to mentoring and coaching clubs, Declan truly sees Toastmasters as a learning laboratory, a place to experiment, grow, and transform. So if you're looking for practical tips to enhance your speaking skills or want to learn how to make the most of your Toastmasters journey, you are in the right place. Let's dive into the conversation with Declan Shalvey. Declan, welcome to Destination 101. How have you been?
I'm well, Sneha. Good to see you, and thanks for inviting me to this session today.
You're welcome. Pleasure is all ours. Declan, let me start by asking, you have been part of Toastmasters for over a decade across multiple clubs and leadership roles. What initially drew you to Toastmasters and how has it shaped you over the years?
So I initially joined Toastmasters, Sneha, to improve my ability to speak extemporaneously. I'm a technology executive and an engineer, and I was often asked to serve on expert panels, and I wasn't comfortable with that impromptu format, to be candid with you. And I thought Toastmasters would help me think on my feet and be more comfortable with the medium, and it certainly has. But since I joined Toastmasters, of course, it has made me a better speaker and helped me crystallize some of the key elements of public speaking as well as leadership.
Okay, great. Declan, you are a seasoned and accomplished speaker. Many beginners, they struggle with stage fright. It's something very basic. But what strategies have you found most effective in overcoming nervousness and becoming a confident speaker when you started out?
Stage fright affects all of us, Sneha, and it certainly was a bigger part of my Toastmaster life when I joined. But even today, for bigger speeches, for contests, a little bit of that stage fright reappears. So it's a natural thing. But first and foremost, for me, it's about preparation. And the more prepared I am for a speech, the less stress I feel. So put in the time, put in the effort, and prepare your speech, write that script, and have it in your head. Secondly, I believe in this notion of visualization. Before an event, a conference, or a panel discussion, or even a business meeting, I imagine myself going onto that stage, whatever it is, making some eye contact directly with people in the audience. And I imagine myself being confident and successful in that event. Then, when I actually go to do it in the real world, in real time, it feels like I've been there before, Sneha, and that relaxes me. So that visualization is a technique that I've used for more than 40 years, and it's really helpful to me. Now, one of the things that I do for every event, every speech, before I start, I always take a pause and I take a few deep breaths. Many of us, when we almost forget to breathe when we're anxious, and those 3 or 4 deep breaths relaxes me, allows me to compose myself, and then I begin my speech. And lastly, practice, practice, practice. The more we practice in speaking in public, the less stressful it becomes for us, Sneha. So there are my ideas.
Great. So practice, preparation, deep breaths, and there was one more thing you mentioned.
Visualization.
Visualization, yes, visualization. This is something I need to start. Declan, you won the Fall Fusion Humorous Contest. Many of us are able to structure speeches, and we do have some great personal stories to share. But when it comes to humor, we struggle. What's your secret to incorporating humor into speeches effectively? And how do you unravel humor in your speeches?
Well, I start from an unusual space with a humorous speech, Sneha. I start out by writing a speech that has no humor, that is not in the least bit funny, because I want to focus on the fundamentals of the speech structure, it's the opening, the main body, the personal stories, as you pointed out. And I work hard on the conclusion or the message. Even a humorous speech has to have a message or a point. Then I begin on the humor journey. So my goal is to make people smile or laugh in the first 30 seconds, because if you can get to humor quickly with your audience, then they relax and they know that you're going to entertain them, and they know there's another smile or another piece of your coming. So get to humor early, because otherwise the audience may disconnect it and become bored. To get to the actual humor, I introduce characters, Sneha, into the speech. The characters' dialogue allows you to say something that you can't say yourself as the narrator. The characters can make fun of me. That's the way I bring out self-deprecating humor. And that really helps bring in the humorous perspective. Now, once I have humor embedded in the speech, I then focus on delivery, vocal variety, and movement, all those non-verbal techniques that match the humor, because that complements what you say and encourages people to laugh. They're the ideas that I have of bringing humor to the stage. It is difficult, but there is a process. Those fundamentals, I think, will help anybody, whatever their confidence around humor is, to write those funny speeches. So, yeah.
But still, don't you think it's very difficult to prepare the structure first and then inject the humor later? Because many times the jokes are situational. So how do you do that?
Well, every situation and every story has, for instance, the opportunity to have humor. When I won the contest, one of the points I made was I went to a pub in Ireland when I was 16 years of age. Now, what's funny about that? Well, what was funny about that was that the barman was looking at me and I saw him begin to smile. And I looked over my shoulder and there's my father. And my father says, "Get out of here right now." So I create those type of situations that bring a smile. Now, a key thing I probably should have mentioned, Sneha, is that when we're thinking about humor, sometimes we think about the stand-up comic routine. I don't go there. I think about a simple smile, perhaps a laugh. And if you're really lucky, you'll get that belly laugh that those stand-up comics deliver. So just think of gentle humor, everyday situations. The humor is right there. It just needs to be revealed.
Very true, very true. That was really helpful, Declan. But what makes a great speech evaluation? Let's come to the evaluation now. And how can Toastmasters use feedback to improve faster?
Well, first of all, I think I should just remind ourselves, what's the purpose of an evaluation? The purpose of an evaluation is to help the speaker get better, give them some feedback on what worked for them and what perhaps they could improve. And lastly, you must have the ability to deliver the evaluation in a way that the speaker can hear and that motivates. So that sounds simple, doesn't it, Sneha? How hard can it really be? But let's dig a little deeper. When talking about a speaker's strengths, I always say, what is the strength that you have seen, but tell them why it worked for you, the evaluator. Sometimes people don't understand their strengths, they don't recognize the power of their strengths. And I always think that when it comes to improvement for a speaker, they should first of all call upon the strengths that they already have. And we as evaluators encourage them not to rest on their laurels, push themselves and leverage their strengths more. So that first section, which is positive, the positive section where people have already demonstrated strengths, is really important from an improvement perspective. Now, when it comes to improvements per se, I say you have to say what that improvement suggestion is. Be very clear about it and let people know why that's important and why you think it's important for them to consider that improvement. But in addition to what and why, if you can demonstrate an improvement suggestion, then you can make an even more compelling case for your speaker to improve. Now, lastly, some tips, general tips that I think are rather important. And this may surprise some of you, some of our audience. I suggest we refrain from what I call superlatives. Sneha, I listened to your last speech. It was an amazing speech. That was a fantastic speech, one of the best I've ever heard. I don't think we should say that to people, even if they're good speakers, because you perhaps will make speakers complacent. Okay? No matter how good a speaker is, they can always improve. And your job as an evaluator is to find that nugget to help them improve. And then the last general point is, when we think about improvement suggestions, we sometimes hesitate to be direct and honest. You don't want to hurt their feelings. You want to be gentle. You don't want to, sometimes we water down the constructive feedback, and I think that doesn't serve the speaker well. There's a wonderful book written by Kim Scott called Radical Candor. She worked for Apple and Google and has consulted for many companies here in the US. And her message is, be as clear, direct, and honest as you can. And if you can show that you care about the development of the speaker, you have a great opportunity to land that message and allow them to, or enable them to absorb that feedback. All of those ideas, I suggest, Sneha, will help our speakers improve faster. Once we have that clarity and that sense of purpose, I think we can help people improve quickly.
That was a great response, Declan. So number one, we need to elaborate on the strengths by suggesting what exactly the speaker did well. And then when you come to the improvements, tell them how and what to do to improve the speech, demonstrate, and then be gentle and kind to them and avoid using superlatives, right? To summarize what—
That's right. One final thing is when we're talking about either the positives or the areas of improvement, explain to the speaker why we, the evaluator, saw that as a strength or saw that. So if people understand why we have an opinion on their speech in a specific area, that can help them, Sneha.
Great. Yes. Declan, you've conducted over 120 workshops. And if you had to pick 3 essential skills that every speaker should develop, what would they be?
If I had to give 3 essential skills, what would that be? That's a great question. I think that, first of all, I would focus on the fundamentals of a speech. Now, what do I mean by that? And that is really around structure, Sneha. Organize the thoughts well. Good opening, the solid main body and the conclusions, and write it down. When people tell me, oh, I've got the idea, I'm going to make the speech, then they're not as prepared as they could or should be. So that's the first fundamental. Write a speech, follow that, I suggest, classical structure. Now, second thing is, even with great content, the experts tell us that 60 to 70% of the effectiveness of the communication between people is driven not by what we say, but how we say it. So I suggest that speakers focus on mastering these nonverbal techniques. And what does that mean? It means making eye contact, even on Zoom. There are different types of vocal variety that we should understand and exercise, volume, pace, pitch, and tone. And of course, have appropriate hand gestures and body movements. So those are the fundamentals that I think we should really focus on. And maybe the third fundamental that I would offer is that notion of practicing, Sneha. Repeat the speech, do it many times. For instance, when I won that contest in 2020, the humorous contest, I think I delivered that speech 30 times. And I rewrote it 40 times. There's huge value in the notion of practicing. They're my three pieces.
Declan, there's this one doubt which is running in my head. There are speakers who have been in the Toastmasters for like 4 or 5 years and they have delivered many speeches, but still, when it comes to contests or when it comes to something which is very a special presentation or a keynote where they know there will be specialized audience, they get nervous and they have slip ups in their speeches. They fumble sometimes. Why do you think that happens despite being there and doing that so many times? What is the psychology that runs behind it?
The psychology, I think, that runs behind that is that there's a couple of fundamental issues going on here that people feel they can't control. So, first of all, in those situations, people feel they're under time pressure. They have a 5 to 7 minute keynote or a 15-minute keynote to deliver or a 2-minute table topics. And the time pressure introduces anxiety to people, and that's real, and we all feel that. Secondly, and I think just as destructively, we feel that when we're giving that keynote, we have to be the best we've ever been. We have to perform at a very, very high level. So what I encourage people to do is think on creating a little bit of time for themselves, even in the keynote. Before they start, take those pauses, take those breaths. Perhaps say something light, say something simple. I'm giving this keynote in the afternoon, Sneha, and perhaps I'll say, well, I think this is the toughest time of the day. You've all had a wonderful lunch, and my goal here was simply to keep you awake. So you can say something that is not germane to the main content, but relaxes you. And then secondly, how do you get over this performance anxiety? What I do is I think of that keynote simply as a conversation, because that's what it is. I'm having a conversation with you here today, and it's one-on-one. But if I'm in front of 100 people, I look at perhaps a friendly face in the audience, somebody I recognize, and I make eye contact with them for a few seconds, and I have a conversation with that person, and then I move on. So I think of those as conversations, and that might help that deep anxiety that even affects the more experienced Toastmasters.
That's a wonderful idea. Looking at the friendly faces among the audience, identifying them beforehand, and then looking at them and delivering the speech. That will relax you. I'll try doing that next time.
My challenge, my only challenge in this regard is finding somebody that I consider a friend, Sneha. That's my challenge.
Yes, I think that's everybody's challenge. Yes, true.
And there's an example of extemporaneous humor, just something that occurred to me. Say it naturally, and thank you for that wonderful smile. So it entertained you momentarily.
All right. Declan, as a club coach and mentor, what are the biggest challenges that clubs face in retaining and engaging members, and how can leaders address them?
I would say, maybe to get us started on this topic, that most people join Toastmasters, I believe, to become better speakers. Probably I've heard statistics that 80% of people want to become better speakers, and they get to leadership later. But unfortunately, and we're all aware of this statistic, the attrition rate for new people is about 40%, for clubs, I should say, is 40% in that first year. So we have to get, I think, the solution to that attrition rate is to get to the value that Toastmasters offers new members quickly. Now, what I do about that in the clubs that I'm in, I either do it or encourage clubs to think about assigning an experienced Toastmaster as a mentor immediately to that new member. Then the mentor needs to understand why that person has joined Toastmasters. What are they trying to accomplish? What is their goal? Ask them what success for them looks like. And if they have any timeframes in mind to achieve that success, perhaps there's an upcoming keynote that they want to deliver in 3 months. Maybe there's a family member is getting married, maybe your child is getting married and you want to do one of those fathers of the bride speech. I did one of those last October. It was great fun. Maybe for me only, but maybe my daughter enjoyed it as well. But then match those new members with a Toastmaster who has the skills that new mentor wants to acquire. That's key. Assign somebody who can help people achieve those goals and then get them going. Now, so that's, I think, works. And if you can do that, and I typically think of assigning members for at least 3 months, get people through a level 1, you begin to get them on a path where they see or they can actually achieve some of their early objectives, Sneha, or they see that path to it. That retains them, that motivates them to continue on their journey. Now, in thinking about this particular question, I also will acknowledge that it's sometimes a little bit more difficult with experienced Toastmasters to solve their declining interest. But I always say engage them. If you see them falling off in their attendance and making speeches or taking roles, find out, ask them what's going on and listen carefully. And I believe if we listen carefully to what people describe as affecting their motivation around Toastmasters, you'll find something that you can take in action. So those are the ideas. Mentorship is huge for me, and just asking people and listening. Not a revolutionary concept.
I know clubs delay this process of assigning mentors to the new members, and I think that is the one area of focus for every club. Great answer. Now, you've been a district finalist in table topics. Let's come to table topics now. What are your best tips for thinking quickly and answering impromptu questions confidently?
Now, you mentioned the workshops I give in District 101 primarily. Table topics impromptu speaking is the most popular one. I have delivered 120 or so workshops. I think about a third are related to table topics. So what can we do? What's the best thinking is, and how can we answer them confidentially? So we can create, back to this notion of creating time. When I competed in those table topics finals a number of years ago, the winner paused for 10 seconds before he spoke. The runner-up, Sneha, paused for 15 seconds to compose his thoughts. I felt like an up there on the stage and thumping his chest. I thought he was having a heart attack, but no, he was thinking. So the message is that I have to in table topics is don't rush it. Take a little bit of time to think about how to respond. But beyond that, I'm also a great believer in what I call frameworks. What does this mean? When you're posed with a question, think about how to frame your response. Is this a question that you can say, I agree with it, or I disagree with it? Make the argument. Is this something that maybe it's not clear what the right thing to do is, or what the right position to take is? Make an argument, a pro and a con, and have that debate in front of the audience, and it really engages people. One of my favorite frameworks is the notion of PREP, this acronym, PREP. Make a point. What are the reasons you believe the topic, in the topic? What are some examples of it, and what's the point again? So it's a great way to think about any topic, and PREP structures your delivery in a very logical way. And there's many other ways, past, present, and future. If somebody, for instance, asked me today, what's my confidence in leadership, political leadership around the world? I would say in the present time, it's not that good. It's not that encouraging, but we've had some great leaders in the past, the John F. Kennedys, the Nelson Mandelas, the Mother Teresa's, and perhaps there'll be I have great confidence in the future. That's a way of structuring an answer around the past, present, and future timelines. So think about those type of techniques, and it helps you think quickly and organize logically, in my humble opinion.
The best part of what you said was take 10 minutes to think, because that silence is so intimidating. We are so afraid to pause and let go of our thoughts and think more impromptu. That's a wonderful tip.
Let me just emphasize that tip in the real world, because in a table topics contest, you can wait for those 10 seconds or so. But in the real world, if you're asked a question by a senior executive in your company where you work, you can create the sense of time by saying, well, that's a great question, and ask maybe that person to expand upon the question, to get more clear about the question. And in that natural conversation, you're thinking, how will I respond? And you get organized. So that notion of creating time is very relevant. And thanks for highlighting it again, Sneha.
I remember one of my favorite speakers, Sushmita Sen, who's from India, when she won the Miss Universe crown, she was asked this question by one of the judges, and she said, "Can you please repeat the question?" And the question was so long that she got a good amount of time to think about it and respond. So that was a good strategy she adopted. I remember that. You reiterate.
That's a great strategy. I always offer a point of caution, though, Sneha, by saying that, because in some ways it might reflect that you're not listening, and that might be perceived as a negative. But if it was a long, complicated question, absolutely the right thing to do, to use it, because it forces the questioner to become a little bit more clear. And as you say, the mental cogs are turning and you're thinking about what you're going to say.
Right. That's a good perspective. Right. Declan, many people, they plan to quit Toastmasters if they feel that they aren't achieving the desired results in a given period of time. So for someone starting their Toastmasters journey today, what's the one piece of advice that you would give them to help them succeed faster?
For me, it's something that I have incorporated into many aspects of my life well before Toastmasters, but it's very relevant in Toastmasters. And it may have come from my mother. I'm not sure. I can't remember the origin. But I think she would have said to me several times, Declan, prior planning prevents poor performance. So the answer is planning, I think. Plan that activity, get clear on the objectives, talk to your mentor. What's a reasonable time frame to achieve something? And be reasonable, because if you set an unreasonable time objective, that can then become a demotivator of people. Oh my goodness, I thought you were going to solve all my problems in the first 3 weeks in Toastmasters. That's not realistic. So set a realistic plan, but then focus, on execution with the person, or focus on your own execution, or work with a mentor to get it done. So prior planning prevents poor performance, and the opposite of that is prior planning will help you achieve and be successful in whatever you want to achieve.
Planning with a mentor and being realistic. That's what you're suggesting.
That's right. Be very realistic, because unrealistic plans have a habit of going south. Sneha.
Truly, truly. Declan, this was a very insightful, very helpful conversation. And thank you for sharing your experiences, your strategies, your wisdom with us. Your journey truly highlights how Toastmasters is not just a place to practice speaking, but it's also a learning laboratory, as you call it, for personal and professional growth. For all our listeners, whether you are a seasoned Toastmaster or you're just starting out, remember that every great speaker once started as a nervous beginner. So keep practicing, keep learning, and most importantly, keep speaking. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to Destination 101 for more inspiring stories and expert tips. Until next time, happy speaking. Sayonara.